He once won 63 consecutive Premier League games without giving away a single penalty. Let that sink in for a second. 63 games. No fouls in the box. No rash tackles. No panic. Just pure, silent control. That was Michael Carrick, the player. The man who never seemed to be in a hurry because he was always one step ahead of everyone else on the pitch. But here's the question nobody is asking loudly enough right now. What happens when that same brain, the one that quietly ran the engine room of the most dominant midfield of its generation, is handed the keys to the entire car? Because that's exactly the position Manchester United is putting Michael Carrick in. And if you think this is just another feel-good, bring-back-a-legend appointment, stick around. Because what Carrick actually built at Middlesbrough tells a completely different story. A more interesting one. A more dangerous one. One with a ceiling that might be higher than anyone expects, and a floor that could genuinely save this club from itself. So let's get into it. The ghost in the machine. Everyone remembers Carrick the player, the metronome, the silent operator who dictated tempo from 20 yards deep, rarely sprinting, rarely shouting, always thinking 3 passes ahead of the game in front of him. He was the kind of footballer who made the hardest job on the pitch look like the easiest one in the building. And that's precisely the trap, because when people imagine Carrick the manager, they picture that same calm, understated figure standing on the touchline, and they assume that calmness translates directly into his football. It doesn't, not exactly. What Carrick built during his time in the Championship wasn't passive. It wasn't safe. It was methodical in the way a chess grandmaster is methodical. Quiet on the surface, but constantly manipulating the board underneath. So forget the nostalgia for a second. Forget the highlight reels of him gliding past pressure at Old Trafford. The real question, the one that actually matters for United's future, is this. What does a Michael Carrick team actually do on a football pitch when he's the one calling the shots? Building the machine inside Carrick's system. When Carrick took charge in the Championship, he didn't inherit a project. He inherited a crisis. A team teetering above the relegation zone, low on confidence, low on identity. And instead of ripping everything up in a panic, he did something far more calculated. He installed structure. On the whiteboard, it looked like a simple 4-2-3-1, but that shape was almost a decoy, a starting point rather than a destination. In actual possession, it would morph and stretch into something far more modern, a 3-2-5.
If you're not deep into tactical jargon, here's the translation. It's a shape designed to do 2 things simultaneously that most systems struggle to balance. Dominate the ball and protect against the counterattack the moment it's lost. This is the part where most managers get exposed. Attacking football is easy to admire and brutally easy to punish, because the second you commit numbers forward, you're exposed in transition. Carrick's solution was elegant. His fullbacks and midfielders were drilled, not encouraged, drilled, to maintain very specific distances from each other. Distances designed to manipulate the opponent's defensive shape like a magnet pulling metal filings out of position. Short, vertical, purposeful. That's the passing pattern he demanded through the center of the pitch. Not for the sake of possession football as an aesthetic, for a reason. Every pass through midfield was a probe, testing which gap the opponent's defensive line would open next.
And here's the piece that made it genuinely dangerous rather than just tidy. Patience as a weapon. Carrick's teams weren't in a rush to force the ball into the final third. They were content to bait the press, to let the opposition commit bodies forward, to invite them into a false sense of control. And then, the moment that mid-block cracked open even slightly, the tempo change was instant, clinical, almost cruel. Wingers and fullbacks would explode into the exact pockets of space the opposition had unknowingly vacated seconds earlier. That's not the football of a nostalgic legend coasting on reputation. That's the football of a manager who understands spacing at a level most coaches spend their entire careers chasing. Why this might actually fit Manchester United. Now here's where it gets genuinely exciting if you're a United fan, because this style isn't just good football in the abstract.
It maps almost perfectly onto the profile of players already sitting in that dressing room. United, right now, is stacked with technically gifted midfielders and forwards who are far more comfortable operating in tight pockets of space than they are running in behind in isolation. A double pivot at the base, the exact structural principle Carrick has spent years refining, could finally provide the kind of defensive stability that's been conspicuously, painfully absent in recent campaigns. Think about the profile of a player like Kobbie Mainoo, composed under pressure, comfortable receiving the ball in traffic, capable of turning defense into attack with a single half turn. That's not a coincidence. That's exactly the kind of player Carrick's system is engineered to unlock. Bruno Fernandes, similarly, thrives in exactly the kind of disciplined but creative role this structure demands. A player given license to be the spark, precisely because the rest of the machine around him is drilled into positional discipline. This is a system that rewards football IQ over individual chaos. It's a system where the collective shape creates the opportunities, rather than hoping a moment of magic bails the team out. And if there's one thing that's been glaringly, repeatedly missing from Manchester United in recent years, it's exactly that. A coherent identity that doesn't collapse the moment the star player has an off night. But here's the uncomfortable question. So it all sounds promising, right? Structure, patience, a roster built to execute it. Case closed? Not so fast. Because here's the uncomfortable truth hiding underneath all of that tactical elegance. Carrick's entire system is built on an assumption. It assumes the opponent is willing to engage.
In the Championship, teams generally do. They press, they commit numbers forward, they take risks. Because they have to, in a division where mistakes are punished less ruthlessly, and points are fought for with far more chaos. That willingness to engage is exactly what allowed Carrick's baiting, patient, positional approach to thrive. The opponent kept giving him the rope he needed to hang them with. Manchester United doesn't get that luxury. Not against the teams that actually matter. At the elite level, in the biggest games of the season, opponents don't take the bait. They sit deep. They compress the pitch into a stubborn, disciplined low block, and simply refuse to offer the space that a 3-2-5 build-up is designed to exploit. And that is precisely where lower league possession systems have historically gone to die when they're transplanted straight into the Premier League. So the real question isn't whether Carrick understands football. Nobody serious is debating that anymore. The real question is this: what happens when his patient, spacing-based approach runs into a Premier League back five that refuses to move? Because if the opponent won't come out to play, how do you manipulate space that was never offered in the first place? The adaptation test. History is littered with cautionary tales here. Managers who built beautiful, possession-dominant systems in a lower division, only to watch that same football evaporate the moment the opposition became sophisticated enough to simply say no. The Premier League doesn't offer the same margin for error. The gaps are smaller, the recovery runs are faster, the press arrives half a second sooner than it did in the Championship. And half a second, at this level, is the difference between a line-breaking pass and a turnover that ends up in your own net. This is the tightrope Carrick would be walking.
His approach is very likely to raise the floor at Old Trafford in the short term. Fewer chaotic capitulations, fewer nights where the team looks like it has no plan whatsoever. That alone would represent progress. But whether his ceiling is high enough for a club that measures itself against actual title challenges is a completely different question, and one that can only be answered by watching how quickly he adapts when his first plan gets shut down. And here's the thing that should give United fans a genuine reason for cautious optimism. Carrick has already shown, at every single stage of his career, an ability to learn in real time. As a player, he evolved from a raw, if gifted, deep-lying passer into arguably the most tactically intelligent midfielder of his era. As a manager, the Middlesbrough version of Carrick in his final months looked meaningfully different, more refined, more varied than the version who first walked through the door under crisis conditions.
Adaptability isn't a guarantee, but it's the single most important trait for any manager stepping up multiple levels at once. And it might be the one trait that actually matters more than the system itself. Think about it this way. A rigid tactician gives you one plan and hopes the opposition cooperates. An adaptive one gives you a framework and then quietly rewires it week to week, opponent to opponent, until the framework starts bending reality in his favor instead of the other way around. Every great managerial success story at the elite level shares that same trait underneath the surface level tactics: the willingness to be wrong on a Tuesday and correct by Saturday. That's the version of Carrick United fans should actually be hoping for. Not the man who arrives with a fixed blueprint and forces every opponent to fit inside it. The man who watches the first low block shut his 3-2-5 down completely, goes back to the drawing board that same night, and comes out the other side with a wrinkle nobody saw coming. An overload on the far side, a false fullback tucking inside, a front three interchanging positions just enough to drag a center back out of position. Small adjustments, compounding advantages. That's how patient systems survive contact with elite level defending. And there's a deeper layer to this too, the psychological one. Dressing rooms at the top level are unforgiving of confusion. Players don't just need a tactical plan, they need to trust that the plan works, especially in the moments when it isn't working yet. Carrick's calm, understated authority as a player, the same quality that made him so difficult to rattle on the pitch, might end up being just as valuable in the technical area as anything drawn on a tactics board. A dressing room that believes in the process during a rocky first few months is a dressing room that survives long enough to see that process pay off. So what actually happens next? Here's where we land. The question was never really whether Michael Carrick understands the game. We know he does. Anyone who watched him marshal that midfield for over a decade at the very top level already knew that. The real question, the one that will define whether this appointment becomes a stabilizing masterstroke or another chapter in United's chaotic managerial history, is whether he can bend a philosophy built on patience and manipulation to survive in an environment that refuses to give him the time and space it thrives on. Can he find that balance between his principles and the unforgiving pace of the Premier League? Will the theater of dreams finally get the calm, structured identity it's been chasing for the better part of a decade?
Or will this become just another example of a promising project getting crushed under the weight of expectation before it ever had the chance to breathe? That's the story worth watching. Not the nostalgia, not the highlight reels. The actual tactical experiment unfolding in real time at one of the biggest clubs on the planet. If this kind of deep tactical breakdown is what you're here for, make sure you're subscribed, because we're only just getting started, and the next chapter of this story is going to move fast.